All right, one of the great songs of all time, right there, and see if you can find the link to our material today. Okay, so welcome, Mishna Monday. Welcome to Mishna Monday. We are back. We're back. By which I mean to say there's been like a little disruption in our calendar for lots of good reasons. We always study Mishna, the kind of first rabbinic code of law, which was formulated in the year 220. We always study Mishna at the 12 o'clock hour here, here in California anyway, and on Mondays. And we are sort of making our way through the 6 orders of the Mishnah, which we're doing because I just feel like it's the best. I've come to feel like it's the best way to kind of sink your teeth straight into core Jewish knowledge, like just to get the basics, the spine of this tradition. The Mishnah is like an attempt to do that, and so it's just good to study Mishnah if you want to be a knowledgeable Jew, which I do, and there's something more though to the Mishnah that I think is particularly important, which is not just the knowledge of the rituals, but the Mishnah gives us a kind of an impression, a sense of what life was like for the rabbis who lived in the 1st and 2nd century of the Common Era. Like, what was their Judaism like? And what's most important for our purposes is to think that the question what their Judaism was like was a question that we ask about people who were living in catastrophe, people who were living after the destruction of the temple and trying to figure out what Judaism would be like when their whole world was changing. That's the first great statement that they made. And when I say they, I mean a group of people that we now refer to as the rabbis. The first great statement they made about how do we live now was the Mishnah. And that's really important, I think, for us, because we live in a time when so many things are changing. Since whatever period we call modernity, Judaism has been reckoning with the question about how do we do this? What's Judaism going to look like now? Lots of different answers, but it's the same kind of project. And so the rabbis have so much to teach us. We learn about them, but by learning about them, we learn about ourselves, our own dilemma, our own situation. Okay, that's the big topic. I want to just again say that we've been moving our way through the Mishnah all year, but we take little breaks, or not breaks, but we jump around when the calendar calls for it. So when there's a holiday, we tend to jump out of order and study the Mishnah that talks about that particular holiday. And for the last 7 weeks, we have been following the tradition of studying the Mishnah, the particular tractate of Avot, which is the least legal of the volumes. It's an ethical treatise or collection of ethical statements, and the custom is to study that between Passover and Shavuot. We did that, then it was Shavuot, so we were off last week, so we're sort of like, I find myself kind of trying to reorient myself, get back into the material. And so I will remind you, as I reminded myself, that where we last left our hero, the Mishnah, was at the beginning of the 2nd order. There's 6 orders of the Mishnah. The first one, we spent a lot of time studying agriculture. Good job to everyone who stuck around for that, because it's like not so relevant to most of us. But we're now heading into Moed, which is holidays. Okay, so this is going to be relevant because our Judaism, one of the answers to the question, what's Judaism going to look like, is that it started to be formulated around the observance of a calendar life, right? The calendar is one of the great institutions, and the holidays are the ways that we track our way through the calendar. So we're at the beginning, and what's the most important Jewish holiday? Most important Jewish holiday? Anyone? Miriam?
Shabbat.
Someone says Shabbat. Yeah, Shabbat. Shabbat is the right answer. Shabbat is the right answer, even though it doesn't make sense because it's a holiday every week. But yes, Shabbat is actually more important to us than all the other holidays. Shabbat is And the first tractate of the Mishnah in Seder Moed is Tractate Shabbat, and it's huge, 24 chapters long, which is almost unheard of, right? There are just a few other volumes of the Mishnah that are that thick, and Shabbat is thick because it's an attempt to describe what it means to keep Shabbat, and that's not something that the Torah talks about a lot. Torah says keep Shabbat. It's clear that Shabbat is first chapter of the Torah. It's clear that Shabbat is some kind of some important institution. It's one of the 10 commandments, but we don't actually really know how to keep Shabbat, and the rabbis are the ones who figure that out for us, or pass that on to us, or as some would say, come up with it out of thin air, right? So lots of different theories on the project of the rabbis, but that's the project we're in, and we're going to start looking now at the first Mishnah. I will also say we will take a break for some part of the summer, if only because I'll have a little vacation, but also because I think it'll like our numbers may dwindle a little and people travel. So there'll be a few weeks that we'll take a break in the summer. I think what we'll do is study Shabbat for the next few weeks. Try to get some like laws of Shabbat under our belt. Try to understand how Shabbat forms and develops. That's such an important topic. And we'll do that for a while, and when middle of June or something, we'll pause and we'll break. And then when we pick up again, as we do, we'll probably be studying Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Mishnah. But Mishnah Mondays, hopefully the plan is to keep going all year and into next year. I have big questions about what will happen to this online community that we formed this year of learning. And we want to do some more in-person learning, so that there's ways in which we'll begin to offer different kinds of learning. But especially at this midday hour, I think the online space is for those of us who can make the time, is a really convenient way to learn. So I'm hoping for this to become just an institution, and love your feedback on that. Okay, so let's say a blessing, and then get into our learning for today. We're going to say a blessing just to thank God for the opportunity to talk to each other through Torah. Okay, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kidshanu B'Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu La'asok B'Divrei Torah. Okay, let's begin, and we're going to begin in the beginning of Masechet Shabbat. Great fat tractate. I feel like I should show it to you. Check this out. This is the volume of Talmud that gets written on. It's a fat one. Gets written on Shabbat, right? The Mishnah is just the core, the opening texts that the Talmud then develops over a number of centuries. But just to give you a sense of how big and thick this is. So then the question is 24 chapters, Shabbat, major topic. Where do you begin? What is the first topic in Shabbat? And it turns out that the first topic is carrying on Shabbat. Carrying on Shabbat. Okay, so let's look at some text, and then we'll back up a little bit and talk about if any of this feels already foreign to what is carrying on Shabbat, what is Shabbat. We'll give a little more context, but let's take a look at the text so we have some reference point to be in dialogue with. Okay, so here is the texts for today, and we're going to start here at the very beginning. Okay, now I'm going to read it through, and then I'm going to go back, and we're going to do it kind of like line by line, or at least slowly, because it'll be good for us to have the whole context, but the whole project of studying the Mishnah, the whole work of studying the Mishnah, that's what the Talmud is doing. The Talmud is the record of rabbis studying the Mishnah, and they study it assiduously, carefully, painstakingly, and they go through every single word and ask the question of every single possible nuance. And here, I was just calling this up. I wanted to show you that here's a joke we used to have in yeshiva. In yeshiva, Talmud always begins with this little, this is the Mishnah we're going to look at today. And in yeshiva, this is the Talmud. And the first word is always of a chapter is always highlighted with this like little, in the standard printing with this little box. So this is going out on Shabbat, the Yitziot. And we used to have a joke in yeshiva that it would take us 1 month to get out of the box. Right? It's like we can study the first word for a month, and that's pretty much what we did. But so we're going to be painstaking, but let's take a look at the whole Mishnah first, so that we have some idea what we're being painstaking about. Okay, so here we are. Okay, Yitziot HaShabbat, shtayim shehen arba bifnim, ushtayim shehem arba bachutz. The cases of carrying on Shabbat. And here's the curious language of the Mishnah. 2 that are 4 inside and 2 that are 4 outside. Okay, that's some kind of code. You're not supposed to just understand that, but there's some kind of code. The 2 that are 4 inside and 2 that are 4 outside. Okay, how so? How does that work? A poor person stands outside and the homeowner is inside. Ha'ani omed b'chutz u'valabayit bifnim. The poor person stretches his hand inside and places something into the hand of the homeowner. Or he takes something from his hand and carries it out. Then the poor person is liable and the homeowner is exempt. Pishat ha'ani et yado lifnim v'natan letoch yado shel bal habayit o shenatan mitocha v'hotzi ani chayav u'bal habayit patur. The homeowner stretches his hand outside and places something into the hand of the poor person, or he takes something from his hand and carries it in. Then the homeowner is liable and the poor person is exempt. Pashat bal habayit et yado lachutz v'natan letoch yado shel ha'ani o shenatal mitocha v'hichnis bal habayit chayav v'ha'ani patur. If the poor person extends his hand inside, and the homeowner either takes something from his hand or places something into his hand, and the poor person carries it out, then both of them are exempt. Pashatani et yado lifnim, v'natal bal habayit mitocha, o shenatan letocha, v'hotzi, shnehem pturim, exempt. If the homeowner extends his hand outside and either the poor person takes something from his hand or places something into his hand, and the homeowner carries it in, then both of them are exempt. Pshat bal habayit et yado lachutz v'natal ha'ani mitocha o shenatan letocha v'hichnis shnehem pturim. Okay. All right. I'm sure some of you are now wondering, like, why did I show up today? What is going on here? What do you, but that's also part of the experience. Like, you are starting to see the kind of dizzying, but maybe not dizzying, just sort of intricate and intense logic of the Talmud, the way that problems get worked out in the Talmud. The Talmud really takes this kind of discourse and runs with it. Not every Mishnah feels like this, but this one is a good example of the way that cases get kind of parsed out and categories get created in Jewish. You know what I mean? Like, in our tradition, this is the way we talk. This is what it means to talk about, like, pilpul, Talmudic logic, Talmudic discourse. Like, this is the feel for it. Okay, not to say that we understand it totally just yet. So let's back up. Okay, now let's just start by looking at the first line here. And I want to say some things about it, and then I want to ask you some things about it. Okay, the cases of carrying on Shabbat. 2 that are 4 inside and 2 that are 4 outside. Okay, now we've already basically said, and we'll get to this soon, that the 2 that are 4 inside and 2 that are 4 outside is a way of speaking, like a purposeful way of speaking in code, in shorthand. And in fact, the first question that the Talmud will ask, right? Just to give you a sense of how this works. If I clicked to Mishna Shabbat, okay, and then let's make this both languages. If I clicked to Mishna Shabbat, and then I went to the Talmud on Mishna Shabbat, this here, Let's see if I can open it. And there's the Mishnah, and we're going to move through all of this. And I just want to show you this so you see how it works. The Gemara is the Talmud's commentary on the Mishnah. Okay, that when we speak of the Talmud, we're talking about the Mishnah and the Gemara together. And the first question of the Gemara is, we learned in our Mishnah that the acts of carrying out on Shabbat are 2 that comprise 4. Similarly, we learned in another Mishnah that oaths are 2 that comprise 4. So my point is, the Talmud is going to take up exactly this, like the Talmud is going to investigate, why do we speak in this way? Why the 2 that are 4? Why is this the way that the rabbis decided to encode their information? So that's part of it as we learn the discourse. But prior to that, I want to just look at that very first. Let's stay in the box, right? I just want to look at that very first word, yitziot. Now, yitziot here, that does not mean carrying, actually. Okay, what does it mean? It means going out. Okay, and it is in context is going to imply carrying, but the word that is used is going out. Now, carrying. The question that I want to ask you is why we start here? Why is this the opening case for Shabbat? What is it about carrying that we would want to start talking about right away? Okay, so the one I want to give you one answer, and then I want to open it up to you. But one answer is there aren't that many discussions of Shabbat in the Torah. As I said, the Torah tells us about Shabbat, but doesn't really unpack it. But carrying is one of the things that the Torah does speak about. Okay, and here let's just do one example. This is the very first mention of the practice of Shabbat, right? The first mention of Shabbat is creation itself. God keeps Shabbat somehow. But then before even the 10 Commandments, as the children of Israel are beginning to wander out into the desert, they're given manna, like bread from the sky. And then Moses says, eat it today. Eat it on the day you get it. For today is a Sabbath of the eternal. You will not find it on the plain. 6 days you shall gather it. On the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Yet some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found nothing. Okay, so manna is going to come down 6 days, and then it's going to come down double on the 6th day. And the idea is, don't go out on the 2nd day looking for manna. Don't go gathering stuff. Don't go bringing stuff inside, right? Like when we look back at it, it doesn't seem like there's a big discussion about carrying on Shabbat. But like when looking back, it turns out, yeah, I guess that is what they're talking about. Transporting goods inside on Shabbat. And then God gets mad. How long will you refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? Mark that the Eternal has given you the Sabbath and therefore gives you 2 days' food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no one leave his place on the 7th day. So the people remained inactive on the 7th day. There's that language of going out. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't mean carrying. That means staying put, right? Don't go traveling about on Shabbat. Okay, but there was some, why are you going out? You're going out to gather food and bring it in. Okay, so you see, it's like, this is just narrative. It's not yet law, but you can feel, okay, actually the truth is the very first discussion of the Shabbat in the Torah is also kind of a carrying. So maybe that's one answer. But let me turn now to the group. Been talking for 20 minutes. Let me turn to the group and start to get your take on what does it mean to enter into Shabbat with this case, with this. Why is this the start of our tractate? And it looks like Matt has got a thought.
It's my understanding that eventually the limitations of what is work has to do with building the Mishkan, that the things you do to build the Mishkan are, and it seems to me that the overwhelming thing you do in terms of that is carry the stuff from place to place. That carrying is an essential, you do that more than you build.
That's so great, Matt. What you just did is so great, because that's actually, Matt's 100% right. And not only is he 100% right, but Baruch Shekivanta, Matt actually is giving us the original source for, like, that is to say, when the Talmud moves further and says, well, what is the source for not carrying on Shabbat? Is it that story in the desert? But that wasn't really law. That was like the journey through what's the legal source? And the thing that they use, and Matt's right, part of the reason the thing they use is the tabernacle, and part of the reason they use the tabernacle is the rabbis are going to build a whole empire, a whole system out of the tabernacle, when that will be their template for Shabbat. In other words, and this is talk about Judaism 101, core Jewish knowledge. Really, Matt points to it here and reminds us that none of the Torah says to keep Shabbat, but the Torah never says how to keep Shabbat. What does it mean the Torah says not to do work, but the Torah never says what work not to do. So eventually the rabbis, through a kind of midrash, decide that, there is a place in the Torah where we speak about doing work a lot, and that's with the construction of the tabernacle. So it must be that anything that they did to construct the tabernacle, that's the kind of work that's prohibited on Shabbat. Okay? And so that's true, and just a good thing for us to keep in mind in general. And that sort of intuits, well, surely they were carrying stuff around a lot in the tabernacle. Well, now that's true, but not only that, there's a particular verse that the Talmud points to that the Talmud claims shows us that they stopped carrying things around on Shabbat. And I thought it was too complicated, so I didn't include it in our source sheet, but this group is just always too smart for me. So let's go take a look at it. And since Mash mentioned it, you see I've even got it called up over here. It's Exodus 36. Oops, let me give you some English. And they're building the tabernacle here. The people are right. Let's start at the top here. They're building the sanctuary, and they are carrying out the tasks. And Moses says the people are bringing more than they need. And then Moses says this: let no man or woman make further effort towards gifts for the sanctuary. So the people stopped bringing. Their efforts had been more than enough for all the tasks to be done. And the Talmud says, oh, what was going on there? Shabbat was coming in. Shabbat was coming in, and Moses said, stop carrying stuff, stop transporting stuff. Again, it's a drash. It's a way of learning the verse, but that's right. One way of thinking about carrying is that it seems, now that was an oblique reference, and earlier we saw a direct reference. It seems that the Torah is concerned with carrying. The Torah actually doesn't mention much about Shabbat, but does mention carrying. And probably, and I hate to just keep throwing stuff at you, but let's just make our case solid by giving you there's one other big story in the Torah about carrying, and it's a grim one, okay? And it takes place in the book of Numbers. We will read about it in several weeks, and it's this story here. So now I want to give you all the carrying information, and here it is, book of Numbers. Once, when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they came upon a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. So there's this guy on Shabbat, after they've been told earlier not to bring stuff on Shabbat, not to go gather stuff on Shabbat, and he's gathering wood. And those who found him as he was gathering wood brought him before Moses and Aaron and the whole community. He was placed in custody, for it had not been specified what should be done to him. That's interesting, right? They don't know what to do with this guy, but they do know that he's breaking Shabbat, and it's shocking to them. They came upon him like, oh my gosh, look at this guy. He's just violating Shabbat. Well, this is the one thing we've been told explicitly. And then, as I said, the end is kind of grim, kind of very grim. The Eternal said to Moses, the man shall be put to death. The whole community shall pelt him with stones outside the camp. So the whole community took him outside the camp and stoned him to death. as the Eternal had commanded Moses. Okay, so I'm not asking you to love that, but those are the stakes. I mean, it turns out now the question that I just asked, a very specific question in the Mishnah, becomes a very big question in the Torah. Why is carrying such a big deal? Why is going out and gathering things? Why is transporting it? Why is this such a, why? And now the Talmud starts with it. So it turns out that that's one of the great concerns of Shabbat. Why do you think that is? Florine? You don't know. Okay. Miriam.
It's something to do with creating. You're going from public to private domain, and there's transactions going on, and a transaction is kind of creating, and the whole purpose of Shabbat is not to create.
Okay, I'm gonna I love that comment, and also want to kind of disagree with it in some ways. I think you're exactly right when you say that the classic formulation of prohibition on Shabbat is not just a labor, but often we say in English creative labor, because it's okay to, pick up a boulder on Shabbat, or, a heavy weight. It's okay to do push-ups on Shabbat. It's not exertion, it's
right.
creating something new. And why, Miriam? Why is creation the great prohibition?
Because on 7 days we created, and Shabbat we rested.
Okay, exactly. God created the world in 7 days, and on 6 days, really, and on Shabbat, God rested. Right? That the whole origin of what it means. Now, what that means is beyond human understanding exactly, but the whole origin of Shabbat is creating something and then ceasing to create. So the things that you do, which you can't create a flame, or you can't build something, or you can't plant something, creative acts. I do want to say though, that I totally understand where you're going, Miriam, but there's a part of me that's like, wait a minute, carrying's not creating. This is sort of interesting, actually. Carrying is more like doing something, exchange, like that kind of exertion or transport or transaction, but that's more like a different definition of work. It's just like moving about and doing your busy work, rather than what I would have assumed, which is like things that are created anew. So let's continue to investigate this. Yonatan?
I actually think that what's going on here is a bit different. I want to frame it not as the rabbis begin with carrying, but they begin with the situation in which I think they're saying a reasonable Sabbath observant person might be tempted to violate the Sabbath. And they're specifically looking at the Sabbath from the perspective of a poor person who needs something. That's the quintessential example of when might you be tempted to violate the Sabbath? And they even formulate, here's how you actually do it correctly. But I think, number one, there's an enormous amount of foreknowledge that the rabbis assume in their readers. And number two, the Mishnah, as it often does, places itself in the vantage point of the disadvantaged. And I think that's really the essence of why we start with this question.
Yafeh me'od. Thank you so much. If we had spent the next half hour getting to that point, this would have been a successful learning, right? But Yonatan takes us right there. There's something important going on here sociologically. And one of those things, I just want to add or embellish the first part of what Yonatan said. One of the things is that we are seeing this carrying thing to be, it's prohibited. Yes, it is. But it's one of the most difficult, if it's really prohibited and people could get killed for it, according to biblical law. And yet, we keep running into people doing it. And it's really hard to negotiate how we control the public space. And this is something that turns out it happens, it's going to happen, and yet it's prohibited. So what do we do with that? And then Yonatan takes us to the real depth of the Mishnah, which is that the Mishnah chose to give us a case of a poor person standing outside asking for food. And someone's inside, they have a Shabbat meal. It's Shabbat. And someone's starving outside. What do you, but it's a sewer to transport. What do I do? How do I give him the drumstick? Do I? That's a really difficult situation. And what is our law? Our law is that poor people live in the public space. So our law is that poor people just sort of like, they just stay where they are. They stay on their corner. It doesn't make sense. Okay. So we're up against a real sociological problem that we have to figure out if we're going to really insist that Shabbat is serious and we don't carry things on Shabbat. Okay, I want to, just at this moment, it's probably a good time to give you the classic rabbinic definition of carrying, because it'll matter for our Mishnah, which we still haven't analyzed, and we're gonna do that next. But carrying is bringing an object from Reshuta Yachid to Reshuta Rabim, from private space into public space. Okay? In other words, you can carry around your house. You can carry around your house, and in fact, around your estate. Right? And by that logic, it also seems like it's not really bad to carry out in the public space, although eventually we prohibit that as well. But like theoretically, you can move stuff around in the public space. Right? It's their idea of carrying or transporting something is to move something from private space into this other domain, the public space. And I say that because it's technical. That's a technical formulation, but I also say it because I think it helps us to understand the sociological picture that Yonatan is beginning to describe for us, which is that there's a public space and things are happening there that the rabbis are thinking about, but they're not so easy to dictate or control, right? Both because there are people who are doing whatever they want in the public space, like the gatherer of wood, and also because there are people who are stuck out there, right? Okay, all right. Any further sort of like thoughts on carrying as the opening? Because the hour continues, let's make sure that we actually read this or study this Mishnah. It's very difficult, but it's one of these things. Once you get the logic, it actually, I think, it unfolds pretty quickly. So let's take the first case. I'd love to have someone spell out for me what's going on here, because I said the one primary unit of analysis is private space, public space. The Mishnah inserts another set of requirements for what it means to carry something on Shabbat. So one set is bringing something from private to public or public to private, crossing that threshold. But there's another issue that the Mishnah decides is requisite. So let's take a look here and see if anyone can identify what else is the Mishnah saying is necessary in order to have performed the act of carrying on Shabbat. So far we're here. A poor person stands outside and the homeowner's inside. The poor person stretches his hand inside and places something into the hand of the homeowner. So poor person has a rock, stretches it, or has a gift, a flower, stretches his hand inside and puts the flower in the homeowner's hand. Or more to the point, the poor person stretches his hand inside, the homeowner's got a plate of drumsticks, chicken drumsticks, and the poor person grabs one and takes it outside. Then what does it say? It says the poor person is liable and the homeowner is exempt. What does that mean? That means the poor person has transgressed the act of carrying. The homeowner has not. So ask yourself why. What is it that the poor person has done that the homeowner has not done? And just to make the case clear, it works just the other way. The same exchange of goods could take place, but if the homeowner stretches his hand outside and places something into the hand of the poor person, or takes something from the poor person and carries it in, if the homeowner is doing the like, pick it up, put it down, then the homeowner is liable and the poor person is exempt, right? And the next two cases, remember, it's two sets of four, right? Two that are four and two that are four, okay? So here's poor person stretching and placing, or stretching and taking, that's two. Here's homeowner stretching and placing, or stretching and taking, that's two. And then these cases discuss where the poor person extends his hand inside and the homeowner either takes something from his hand or places something into his hand, and then the poor person carries it out. So just notice that here the homeowner is doing the placing, but the poor person's doing the taking out. And the inverse, of course, the homeowner extends his hand outside, but the homeowner extends his hand but doesn't place anything. The poor person takes it out of his hand, or the homeowner extends his hand out and the poor person places something into his hand and the homeowner carries it in, then both are exempt. Okay. Can someone just speak out for us? What is happening? This is the most confusing part of our class, because this is the Mishna. This is the tricky logic of the Mishna. There are two kinds of cases where we can assign blame, liability. Remember, it's a death penalty. We can say a person has performed the act of carrying on Shabbat, and then there are two kinds of cases where we can't. Can someone speak that out for us? Matt, are you on this?
I think so.
Okay.
If I move something across the border, I'm not yet liable or exempt. But if I move something across the border and I engage in the act of giving it to another, then I am liable.
Yeah.
But if I move something across the border and the other person engages in the act of taking possession, then we are both exempt.
Good. That's correct. And but we're going to keep. So let's see if anyone's got any other. That is correct. We're going to give it more precise formulation still, but you're on exactly the right track. Anyone else want to add stuff that they're seeing here? What do I have to do? What's that?
May I jump in for a minute? This is Richard. It looks like they're transferring ownership. And that's a whole act in itself, the transfer of ownership from one to the other. And I'm wondering if that impinges on this case.
It's a great question. I would say that the quick answer is no. It's a great question because it does look like that's a part of what's going on. And there is eventually there's an idea that making a kinyan, coming to own something on Shabbat or transferring ownership on Shabbat is forbidden. But that's, I think, not what they're discussing here. So great question. Yonatan?
Yeah, I think that the rule that they're formulating is that in order to change the state of an object, you need to pick it up in one domain, move it to another domain, and set it down in that domain. If you have not done all three, you have not changed the state of that object.
Woo! Awesome. Yonatan's on fire today. Matt took us some of the way there, and Yonatan takes us further. That the language that Yonatan just gave us a very, very precise English formulation for. In Hebrew, the terms are akira and hanacha. Lifting something up or uprooting, literally, and placing down. As Yonatan said, we already had one variable, which is private space to public space. Now, the Mishnah is inserting another, which is in order for someone to have performed the act of carrying on Shabbat, that person needs to bring something from the private into the public space and has to be the person that performs both the uprooting, picking up, and the hanacha, the placing, the putting down. Okay. That is required in order to have transgressed carrying on Shabbat. And let's just be clear, the latter two cases, nobody is is liable. That is, if I uproot and stick my hand out, but I just leave my hand in the air, right? I'm the homeowner, and I pick up a drumstick from a plate and I just stick it outside. But someone comes by and grabs it. Now, then apparently we get away scot-free. But that's not our practice. That's not what the rabbis ultimately, you're not liable to the death penalty, but it is considered forbidden. You're still not supposed to be doing that. So all of this is just for the rabbis to be able to say, yes, it's true. We don't want any kind of transfer, but what the point they want to make is, but to really have committed the transgression that we see like condemned in the Torah and punishable by, you have to fulfill a lot of requirements. And one of them is you have to do all of the work of picking up and putting down yourself. Now, why do the rabbis care so much? Why are the rabbis insisting? What we might say is this is, and I think it's true, this is just ontology. Like part of the question the rabbis are asking is like philosophical, like what is it, a carrying? What does it mean to carry? Like what does it constitute if we really want to define, like Wittgenstein or something, you want to define language, terms. Okay, but I feel like that's not a good enough answer. Like, why do you think that the rabbis are figuring out cases where one person's obligated, cases where another person's obligated, and then cases where nobody is really, right? Once two people are involved, then nobody actually carries responsibility. That's quite an interesting thing to say about liability in Jewish law altogether. So I just wonder if anyone has a comment on that. What does that mean? Why would the rabbis be interested in dividing between the cases where someone claims responsibility for the act and cases where if you look at all the placing and putting down and nobody's really ultimately responsible? Any thoughts on that? I mean, I have one. I'm wondering, and I'm really just building on Yonatan's comment here, but this is not a traditional thing to say, but do the rabbis want to figure out ways to make carrying not a sin? And why? It sort of seems like they're almost now look, you could say no, Rabbi Kasher, they're just like carefully defining terms. Okay, and this is the logic, but it feels almost like they're searching for ways to make carry, like you have to do a lot to affect an act of carrying on Shabbat. And why would the rabbis be interested in making carrying let's put it this way. Why would the rabbis be interested in making Shabbat harder to have violated? It takes a lot more work to violate Shabbat. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking about Yonatan's description of a vulnerable person. Like what? Maybe I need to figure out a way to give poor people food? I don't know. Because the rabbis don't end up saying, yeah, you can just sneak your hand out and the poor person can take it. It's cool. Remember what we said. No, that's still forbidden. But they're constructing this area of what's called patur aval asur. It's forbidden, but you don't take any responsibility for it. You don't get any blame for it. You're not punished for it. There's something almost like theological being said about it. Like, yeah, you're not supposed to do this, but you don't incur any kind of divine censure for this. It's interesting. It's interesting. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, Agnes.
It just seems like we if the paradigm that we're drawing this from is this idea of manna, we simultaneously want to believe that this is true and that all are provided for in this way, paradigmatic way throughout all history. And also we know that if somebody doesn't have food on Shabbat, there's not something magical that falls from heaven and feeds them. So it's sort of like the same, it's that weird feeling when you're in the Psalms when it's like, and God did this and this and this and lifted me out of the pit. you say those words even when you're still in the pit, that you sort of both believe this thing to be true and you know that it's not true, that we know that manna falls and God provides for all people on Shabbat. And also we know that that is not true and that people don't have food on Shabbat. But there's that feels like the paradox or like the double-headedness of any relationship to this faith in a certain way, or any, like you have those things both exist at the same time and also exist in different ways somehow.
Yeah, that's such a helpful formulation that you just gave us, Agnes. This remembering what's the meaning of that? God will provide for you double on the sixth day. Like, that was the original story. Just trust that God will provide. And if you go out gathering, it's like you're not trusting in God. It reminds me a little bit of the Shemitah year, the 7th sabbatical year. We're heading into one where you're not supposed to farm your land. You're just supposed to trust that God will provide as much yield as you need. But Agnes says that doesn't always work. Manna doesn't fall from the sky anymore. The land doesn't grow in abundance in the seven. The Torah speaks in this way that suggests just do as I say and God will provide. But the rabbis know that doesn't always work. We know that doesn't always work. So part of it is backing away from, the point I was making was backing away from the severity of the Torah. Like, the Torah wants to kill you for this, and especially when there's a practical reality. We have to feed people. What are we going to do? To kill them? But Agnes, I think, brings us to wonder also about the kind of faith that the Torah seems to be insisting on and presuming, the kind of reliance on God, and then the reality that we've got to live in a world and have a practical law that makes sense. I mean, it can't be that the solution is like, God will take care of the poor. Like, no, God won't. They'll starve and die. So there's like real questions about like how the rabbis are reevaluating. And by the way, in the sabbatical year, one of the great rabbinic loopholes is that they figure out a way to keep borrowing going, to keep the economy going, to keep loans going, even though the Torah says forgive all loans, because it's just not it's not going to work. So that's part of, I think, what we're seeing here in this Mishnah. Agnes picks up on that, and I think it's a great insight into the rabbinic project in general. It's like trying to figure out, yes, let's do the law of the Bible, but how? How's this going to work? Right? And where are we running into practical difficulties, right? And some of those practical difficulties, someone's starving, real life difficulties. Okay. All right. All right. I want to, at this point, I think we're almost done, actually, and we can end a little early, but there is one extra piece that I wanted to show you, just to because it's kind of a wild, direct last twist, like wild direction for this to go in. This idea of carrying on Shabbat. This idea that it's important and we have to think about it, and that it keeps appearing in the Torah, and there's the Mishna style, so there's one other major source in Tanakh, in the Bible, that speaks of carrying on Shabbat, and it's randomly in the book of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah, the prophet, suddenly starts talking about Shabbat and specifically focuses on this act of carrying on Shabbat. And Jeremiah's got a very particular formula, like says not to do it, very particular formulation. Take a look at this. Jeremiah says, okay, thus said the Eternal, says Jeremiah, guard yourselves for your own sake against carrying burdens on the Sabbath day and bringing them through the gates of Jerusalem. Okay, so bringing them into the gates of the city. Nor shall you carry out burdens from your houses on the Sabbath day, right? No, it's like Jeremiah's in the Talmud, and like not from a personal space to a public space, or do any work, but you shall hallow the Sabbath day as I commanded your fathers. but they would not listen. Usually translate that as ancestors. But they would not listen or turn their ear. They stiffened their necks and would not pay heed or accept discipline. That we know, right? There are stories of how they carried on Shabbat. But if you obey me, declares the Eternal, or if you listen to me, and do not bring in burdens through the gates of this city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath day and do no work on it, then through the gates of this city shall enter kings who sit upon the throne of David, with their officers riding on chariots and horses, and they and their officers, and the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall be inhabited for all time. Like, wow, what a flourish at the end there. That's messianic language, right? The kings will sit on the throne of David and they will ride in on a chariot and a horse in through the gates of Jerusalem, right? It's like the last volume of Lord of the Rings, right? Like the king returns, Messiah's here. Like this is the imagery that stuff is based. Okay, but it's Jeremiah says, and it all comes down to not carrying on Shabbat. What? What is going on here? Jeremiah is so concerned with like hotzah, as we come to call it, carrying on Shabbat. Why? What is the connection to the great grandeur of the city of Jerusalem? Hannah Jensen's got a thought.
I mean, this question is I don't have an answer, but I'm just wondering about, and this maybe is more true of how we think about Shabbat now. So this comment may be useless, a warning, but just thinking about the fact that there's something about carrying that's more public than a lot of the other kinds of work that are prohibited on Shabbat, that a lot of other things could be done kind of in your home. And maybe that's what I'm saying. A lot of the things then were more agricultural and like building the tabernacle was all public in some sense, but there's something about physically moving something from one space to another that feels more public than, I don't know, like cooking in your house. Like no one necessarily is going to see if you're transgressing Shabbat in that way, but that if you aren't clear about the most public ones, then you certainly can't regulate what people are doing in their house. That you have to start with the most public, most visible, because that's the only thing you actually can hold people accountable to, because what they're doing in their homes or in their spaces or indoors in some other capacity or in the middle of a field alone is much harder to regulate. And so how do you show that this matters? How do you show the importance of Shabbat if you don't hold people accountable in really extreme ways for the parts that are visible? Because everything else is a little bit harder to pin down.
Oh, that is, wow. What an incredibly beautiful and profound frame that Hannah's just given us. That's right. I mean, I think I said it almost the opposite earlier. I said, oh, it's hard to dictate what goes on in the public space. It's just like a free-for-all. It's a private space that we could actually think about. But Hannah's saying it differently. Like, how do we get into someone's house and start? The first thing that we can think about is like, what does Shabbat look like in our community, in the public, in the streets? Does it feel like Shabbat out there? Like, and what does it mean? And I'm sort of taking Hannah's frame and building on it. What does it mean for someone to go into the public space and just be like, screw Shabbat, right? Like that's a concern too. What do we do with someone's just out? Because that was the story of the Mikoshesh Etzim, the gatherer of wood on Shabbat. When they came upon the gatherer, it's like they were startled. They were startled, and you get the feeling like he didn't care, and they don't know what to do. What do you do? There's like a major question here. What do you do when you're trying to have a communal religion, and some people are like, screw this religion, right? That's a part of it too. Or let's not put it that hard. Some people are not rabbis. Some people are not able, some people are hungry. Many, many reasons why people can't possibly be held to the standard of never transport anything on Shabbat. And yet at the same time, Hannah gives us the other side of that reckoning. The rabbis are practical, but they're also trying to create a public space that carries a feeling of sanctity, right? And that's what Jeremiah is talking about. If you can really create that Shabbat environment in the city of Jerusalem, that's what brings the Messiah. It's not just your inner life, public, in your house, you're praying, but if somehow we could create a public life that was Shabbat, that was sacred, that was a kind of a testament to the glory of creation. Okay, then that would be really something, and that matters. And so thinking about the public space and trying to figure out, well, how do we have to be practical, but we also want to insist on something in that public space that's a good way of framing this tension and the tension that is really at the heart of this first considered sort of opening move in the order of not just Shabbat but the whole Seder of the Mishnah that deals with holidays. Because holidays, after all, are our public gatherings. That's when we come together as a community. So how are we going to do that when we're all different in all kinds of ways, economically, religiously, sociologically, in all kinds of ways? How do we do that? I think that is part of what the rabbis are trying to figure out. And with 1 minute left, I'll just say, the obvious way that the rabbis eventually deal with this, and there's really no source in the Torah for this at all, is with the Eruv, right? The Eruv. Like the thing, if you haven't had a chance, watch the Daily Show clip on the Eruv. Like, it's very easy to make fun, the Daily Show. It's very easy to make fun of the Eruv, the boundary that we use, and we have one here in LA, to unite a certain area and to say, this area is all private space. We're all bounded together here and we can transport goods here. I love living in LA because I can carry a book to shul. I love that. We can't do that in every city, right? But the whole idea is like, what is this? It's ridiculous. They just put up a string and now I can do this thing that you get killed for on Shabbat. Well, that's just the point. The rabbis figured out a way to keep the sanctity of Shabbat, but to allow for the differences in practices and the way that plays out in public life. So it's 1 o'clock. Let me close here. Let me tell you just a couple of things as I close. Speaking of Mishnah, we have one of the great teachers of Mishnah in our age. Will be presenting Adi Carr this Thursday night, 6 p.m. I'll be in conversation with Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who founded Svara and the Queer Talmud Camp, and is just one of the great Mishnah and Talmud teachers really of our age. So I highly recommend that you come 6 o'clock on Thursday. It's on our calendar, highly recommend, and we'll be in dialogue around the topic of inclusion. And just as a teaser, when I asked Rabbi Lappi, would you speak on inclusion? Because, she's at the forefront of LGBTQ Jewish issues. She said, I'd love to speak about inclusion. I don't believe in inclusion. So I don't know what that means, but there's a teaser for you there. So please join me on Thursday at 6 p.m. For some great Torah from another teacher of Mishnah. Okay, wonderful. Love you all. See you next week. Oh wait, no, don't see you next week. It's Memorial Day. We're off next week. Memorial Day. All right, bye. Everyone.